For nearly 3,000 years, Egypt was one of the greatest civilizations on Earth. The builders of the pyramids, the kingdom of the pharaohs, a civilization that survived longer than almost any empire in history. But then, one day, a young king from Greece arrived with an army, and Egypt did something almost impossible to imagine. It surrendered, not after a long war, not after a final battle, almost without a fight. How could one of the greatest civilizations the world had ever known allow a foreign conqueror to take its throne? The answer wasn't on the battlefield. It began centuries earlier, when Egypt itself started to fall. After the reign of Ramesses II, the golden age of Egypt slowly faded. The great pharaohs were gone. The kingdom that once commanded respect became divided. Dynasties rose and collapsed. Foreign powers grew stronger, and the throne that once seemed eternal slowly lost its power. Because when a great empire becomes weak, the world notices. And soon, one by one, foreign powers began arriving. First came the Nubians from the south, then the Assyrians from the east. Each invasion was another sign that Egypt was no longer the unstoppable power it once was. Egypt managed to regain independence, but only briefly, because a much larger empire was approaching. It's Persia. In 525 BC, Persian armies entered Egypt. The ancient kingdom became another province of the Persian Empire. But Persia didn't just conquer Egypt. It changed how Egyptians saw their own country. Imagine living in a land where your ancestors built temples, where your gods had been worshipped for thousands of years. But now the people making decisions came from thousands of miles away. Persian governors controlled Egypt. Taxes were collected for a foreign empire, and the throne was no longer controlled by a native Egyptian dynasty. The connection between the pharaoh and the gods, the symbol that had defined Egypt for centuries, was weakened. But one event turned resentment into something deeper. According to Egyptian accounts, one Persian king committed an act that became a symbol of disrespect. Stories spread that he had killed the sacred Apis bull. To the Persians, it may have been insignificant, but to Egyptians, it represented something much larger. A foreign ruler disrespecting the beliefs that had protected their civilization for thousands of years. And from that moment, resentment grew. Egypt was no longer simply occupied, it was waiting for change. For nearly 200 years, Egypt had lived under foreign rule. The people had seen conquerors come and go. They had watched their kings lose power, their traditions challenged, their independence disappear. So when another foreign army appeared on the horizon, Egyptians faced a choice: resist another conqueror, or welcome someone who promised a new beginning. And that man was Alexander the Great. But the man who would change Egypt forever did not come from Egypt. He came from a land divided by mountains, surrounded by seas, and filled with rival kingdoms. Greece. Unlike Egypt, which was built around one powerful kingdom and one great river, Greece was a world of independent city-states, small worlds of their own. These cities were called polis, and each had its own identity. Athens believed in ideas, debate, philosophy, and a radical experiment called democracy. Sparta chose a different path: discipline, sacrifice, war. One city trained its citizens to think, the other trained them to fight. But Greece was not only about politics and armies. It was a civilization obsessed with understanding the world. Socrates questioned everything. Plato explored ideas about society and knowledge, and Aristotle would later become the teacher of a young Macedonian prince, Alexander. Before he became a conqueror, Alexander was a student. Under Aristotle's guidance, he studied philosophy, medicine, and literature. The man who would conquer half the known world first learned how the world worked. But knowledge alone could not unite Greece. For centuries, the city-states fought each other. until one king changed everything. Philip II of Macedon. Through diplomacy and military power, Philip slowly brought Greece under one banner. He created something that had never truly existed before, a united Greek force. But just as his greatest ambition was beginning, Philip was assassinated, and everything he built passed to his son, a young man who was only 20 years old. His name was Alexander. After becoming king of Macedon, Alexander inherited something far greater than a throne. He inherited his father's unfinished dream, a campaign against the Persian Empire. For generations, Persia had been one of Greece's greatest rivals. It had invaded Greek lands, humiliated its cities, and ruled over countless nations across the ancient world. Now Alexander wanted to change that. His army moved east, crossing into Persian territory with one goal: to bring down the empire that had challenged Greece for so long. At the Battle of the Granicus, Alexander defeated the first Persian forces standing in his way. Then at Issus, Alexander faced the ruler of the Persian Empire himself. The battle became a turning point. The Persian army collapsed. Darius III fled the battlefield, leaving behind his family and royal treasury. An empire that once seemed unstoppable was suddenly vulnerable. But Persia was not defeated yet. Its empire was still vast, and Alexander's greatest battle was still ahead. After securing the eastern Mediterranean coast, Alexander turned toward Egypt. But what happened next surprised everyone. There was no great battle, no long siege, no desperate last stand. Egypt offered almost no resistance. Why? Because for nearly 200 years, Egypt had lived under Persian rule. Foreign governors, heavy taxes, a kingdom controlled by rulers who stood far away from the land itself. By the time Alexander arrived, many Egyptians had already lost their loyalty to Persia. So when another foreign army appeared, they did not see another conqueror. They saw a chance for change. The Persian governor in Egypt chose not to fight. He surrendered, and Alexander entered the land of the pharaohs. It was one of history's strangest conquests. A foreign army entered Egypt, not as an enemy to defeat, but as a force many Egyptians hoped would free them. This was the first great turning point of Alexander's journey. Instead of ruling Egypt like many foreign conquerors before him, Alexander did something unexpected. He embraced Egyptian tradition. He was recognized as Pharaoh. He made offerings to Egyptian gods. He presented himself not simply as a foreign conqueror, but as a ruler who respected the civilization he had inherited. But Alexander wanted more than acceptance. He wanted something deeper, a validation. So he traveled hundreds of miles across the desert toward the Oracle of Siwa, a place surrounded by endless sand, a place where Egyptian kings had searched for answers from the gods for centuries. There, the priests connected Alexander with Amun, the Egyptian god associated by Greeks with Zeus, a message that would follow him for the rest of his life. Whether Alexander truly believed it or simply embraced what it represented, the effect was powerful. After this moment, his victories were no longer just military achievements. They began to feel like destiny. He was no longer simply a king who conquered lands. He was a man who believed he had a mission from the gods. But Alexander's legacy in Egypt would not only come from religion, it would come from a city. Standing on the Egyptian coastline, Alexander looked out at the Mediterranean Sea, and he saw something others didn't, a place where Greece and Egypt could meet, a gateway between civilizations. His order was simple: build a city here. That city became Alexandria, and under the rulers who followed him, it would become one of the greatest centers of knowledge the ancient world had ever known. Its legendary library gathered texts from across civilizations. Its scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. And its great lighthouse guided ships from across the Mediterranean into its harbor. A city that did not exist before Alexander arrived would become one of the most important cities on Earth. The irony was that Alexander built something that would outlive the empire he created. His conquests would eventually disappear, but Alexandria would remain. But Egypt was only the beginning. Alexander would continue east, chasing a dream of conquering the entire known world. Then, everything changed. 323 BC. After years of conquest, Alexander the Great was dead. He was only 32 years old. The man who had defeated Persia, the man who had built one of the largest empires the world had ever seen, gone. And the greatest weakness of his empire was revealed. There was no adult heir. No successor strong enough to hold the empire together. The empire Alexander created began to collapse almost as quickly as it was built. His generals fought over the lands he left behind. They were once comrades in Alexander's army. Now they became rivals fighting over his empire. And in Egypt, one man moved first. Ptolemy, a trusted commander of Alexander's army. He took control of Egypt and eventually created a new royal dynasty, the Ptolemaic dynasty. But this created one of history's strangest contradictions. Egypt was still Egypt. The Nile still flowed. The pyramids still stood. The temples still filled with prayers. But the people ruling the land were Greeks. For nearly 300 years, Egypt was governed by a foreign royal family descended from Alexander's empire. Alexandria became the heart of this new world. Greek and Egyptian cultures began mixing. Greek gods blended with Egyptian beliefs. Greek became the language of the palace, government, and intellectual life. The Ptolemaic rulers adopted Egyptian traditions, but they remained outsiders. For generations, they ruled Egypt as Greeks. But centuries later, one queen would stand apart. A woman who represented the perfect fusion of two worlds, Greek by blood, Egyptian by crown. A ruler who would become one of the most famous figures in human history. Her name was Cleopatra.